So our second location for the art lovers theme is the National Portrait Gallery on Queen Street. It's a great venue with some very dramatically lit sculptures and pillars and archways in the entrance hall, and then some other spaces upstairs that we can explore. So you probably might be thinking it's time for a bit of charcoal rub away drawing. That's what I'm going to do to start here, because whilst I'm going to be building up for next week to some sort of oil sketch that I hope will include not just the setting of the art gallery, but also something of visitors to the art gallery, what I'd like to experiment with here at the Portrait Gallery is the atmosphere of, as I've said, this dramatically lit space. So I've started with You Know Who, and I've just come to a position where I can see him against a more quietly lit female figure. I'll not comment on the gender inequality of these two exhibits, but I will comment on the management of light. So she's a bit quieter and he's strongly lit. It'll be to do with egos, I'm sure. But I want to build up a drawing which has a certain atmosphere of this place, and I think working with the charcoal rub away approach is nice and rapid, and also gives me that instant management of light. So a few shapes with the large thick stick of charcoal, and now a little bit of subtraction with the plastic eraser. And because of the kind of bluntness of these implements, the shapes that I make are fairly approximate, and they will need to be refined, but in refining them I will be introducing emphasis to the drawing. So as I've already said, she's quite quiet, so I don't take quite so much off of her part of the drawing. And I may, as I take it off her, even smudge a bit, so I kind of keep her back, keep her in the background a little bit. I've also got some window, because as well as these sculptures, I want to bring out something about the architecture of this amazing gallery. So that's where I start, subtracting a bit. I'm going to do a tiny bit more subtraction, and then I might start to add a little bit of definition to him. But it's a process of adding and subtracting. We're working with tone, so it's a relative thing, and it's only when you start to see things next to each other that you can decide which is lighter and which is darker. So of course we've done a lot of charcoal rub away. It is a good technique, but I want to approach it differently. I'm going to go upstairs next and try a different sort of charcoal rub away. But for here I'm on cartridge paper. It's just an A4 sheet, and I've covered it with, it's white cartridge paper covered with willow charcoal. So I'm going to gradually bring him out, working with his positive shape, but also some of the negative shapes. And of course, when you work just with these tonal shapes, you get something quite dramatic, not too defined, And so I'm going to try and be fairly cautious about how I introduce definition, and you use it in a limited way. So that's the process. I should do just a little bit more to her to try and get this difference between the two, the kind of prominence that he's got against her. And it's really just by working on them that I can gradually, but I want an overlap. There's a nice overlap between them. So just by working on them with subtracting with the eraser and adding a few marks with the charcoal. So that's allowing me to bring her out a little bit more. So just for speed, I might introduce one or two lines. Although I quite like the idea of it just evolving through shapes. And what I want to do with her as well, I've got some of this very grand brick and stone wall, and also then the shadow that she casts. So that's the first approach. I could go further with that, but I'd like to show you something different upstairs. So just to try and extend and develop this particular technique, I'm working on grey paper this time, which of course doesn't need a mid-tone start, because it is a mid-tone start. But I thought if I covered it with charcoal where I did the white paper, not only could I rub away to get some of the tonal pattern, to work with tonal shapes, but I could then put some white chalk on. So it's a little bit dark up here, and I hope you're going to see what I'm doing. But what I want to work with is a bit more of the space. So my composition is going to be divided just by this pillar, which I might make thinner because I don't want it to take up all of my drawing. And I've got a little bit of a, well, it depends how much I want to do. I mean, I think you can see on the screen, you can actually see the arch windows. So I might try and include them so that this composition could also could feature a bit more of the space. And then if I'm going to use this as part of a composition, it would be quite nice to go even higher and get some of those decorative windows, but I'll just go this far for now. So having covered the page with charcoal, I'm now putting on some dark shapes, and then I'll sort of work back to the window with my eraser. So yeah, for the window I'm therefore working back to the grey paper. But actually what I'm particularly interested in is this darker sculpture over here. So I should get, it might be a her again, I think. Should get her in there. And then the one over here, also a lassie, is going to be partly rubbed away and then partly worked on with chalk. So I'd be tempted to save the chalk for a while, but I think in order for you to see what I'm talking about, I'll get a little bit of chalk on this sculpture, just for the very lightest parts. That can be useful to make some sort of tonal note, so that I can then compare it with other parts of the drawing. For example, do I want a little bit more light in the window? Maybe I do. I'm just doing a bit of hatching, so that I can manage the light and dark contrast. And then I think to make this white marble sculpture on the right a little bit more prominent, it'll partly be some of the negative shape, parts of the window, and also just a darkening up of other parts of the sculpture. But as I said with the first drawing, this is all, it's a relative process. So as I make some things darker, I might then want to make other things lighter, and so on. And it's nice to have this sculpture here as well, the back of, featuring somewhere in the foreground. But that is nice to be able to work with the white and actually bring out a more intense contrast when it comes to some of the lightest parts of this subject. I didn't actually get as far as the floor, but again, there might be potential for getting some figures into a drawing like this, some visitors to the gallery. Okay, so I'll leave it there, and we'll be working at the Portrait Gallery on Monday, and then we'll have a final week in the studio making an oil sketch to try and bring some of these elements together.